Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a different martial artist talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today is known worldwide as a teacher of teachers, is an 8th degree black belt and still growing, has dedicated his life to martial arts, earning black belts in 10 unique martial arts styles, has grown a phenomenal team of employees that serve students based in California. His focus for the last several years has been to give back to the industry he loves so dearly, providing resources and training for schools owners around the world. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Dave Kovar. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Hey, thanks for taking the time. I know how busy people get, and it's always a challenge to get these things scheduled, so I do appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
What we like to do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to know where that first interest, that first spark came from that kind of kicked off your martial arts journey.
You got it. Well, you know, it's interesting. My family grew up in Montana, and somewhere in the mid-'60s, I'm probably 5 or 6 years old, we were doing a road trip. And it was probably somewhere around Billings. And I saw a silhouette of a guy doing a flying sidekick. And I on a billboard somewhere, it was probably somewhere, I had no idea, right? But I didn't know what it was, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. It's kind of like martial arts found me. I didn't find martial arts. But at the time, kids just didn't do martial arts. So that's what my father thought. They considered something that's going to make you, he's only for hoodlums and tough guys, right? And so he wouldn't have anything to do with it. And so eventually we moved to California. And anyway, my older brother, Tim, who later on became my business partner for 20 years, went away for a year of college. And then during that year, he trained in Taekwondo and came back and said, Mom, Dad, you got to let Dave do martial arts. So I started, I had been wrestling for a couple of years already I think my first wrestling match was October of 1971. And then I started karate under a gentleman named Bruce Jutnik in September of 1973. So a little over 50 years ago. And that was, and the good news about my instructors, back in the day, when you met another martial artist, it was every style was kind of against every other style. There wasn't like the brother and sisterhood you kind of have more where we tend to be a little bit more, I think, open-minded now. But back then, if you met a guy and he says, oh, yeah, I do martial arts, the first thing you asked him is what style they were. And then from that, you decided if they're going to be your friend or not. Oh, you're a Taekwondo guy, I'm a Kempo guy. We can't be friends. Isn't that silly? But that's just how it was then. But fortunately, my instructor was pretty open-minded. So even back in the day, we were at his school in the 70s, we were doing Filipino weaponry and old school jujitsu. And, so I was kind of exposed to a lot of different styles early on. So fortunately, I never was brought up with that mindset of, just do this one thing. So, and it kind of fit I've never been diagnosed, but I'm sure I have ADHD. So I have a bad case of martial arts ADHD, meaning I like it all. So I'm not really good at anything, but I have a general knowledge in a lot of different things.
Nice. So what specific style of karate was that first style?
American Kempo, like Parker Kempo.
It was. Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
So think back to then, maybe those first 2, 3, 4 classes, something that interested you, you wanted to do it, your parents finally said yes. What was it once you got there that made you want to stick with it?
You know what? It's interesting. I talked about this before. I call it the white belt moment. I remember there was the other reason why I wanted to do martial arts is there was a kid, a bully, when we had moved to California, and I was in the middle of 5th grade, and his name was George Morgan, and he was like a legitimate bully. He was like a guy that really beat people up, and I'm not making this up. He actually had a top 10 list of people he was going to beat up, and I was like number 5 on his list. And I never actually got beat up by him because he chased me home from school once, and that kind of thing. But I always managed to avoid it. But I had this image seared into my memory banks for the rest of my life, where George Morgan's holding this kid up against a chain link fence with 2 hands, like a 2-hand chest grab, and then hauling off off and hitting him with a big right cross, so like knocking this kid out. And we're like 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so fast forward, a few years later, I go to my first class, and it's an American Kempo school, and I learn a move for 2-hand chest grab called kimono grab. And it was like it spoke to me. I had this vision back, and that's when I absolutely knew it was for me. There was, I thought it was before, but after that first class, there was no looking back. This is what I want to do. And this was also, the Bruce Lee days and Kung Fu that, was on TV. And so it was, I was all in from day one.
So did you ever get involved into, I know American Kempo, a lot of them were involved in the competition. Did you ever get involved in the tournament side of things?
Oh yeah. I was a heavy competitor in the 70s, and probably my first tournament was, I think, November of 1973. And the last time I competed was in, 1989. And then I actually did I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 30 years, and I actually competed in the Worlds in the old man's division a couple months ago. First time I'd ever done a jiu-jitsu tournament.
Awesome.
Yeah. I won my first match, lost my second, but the guy, it was all good. So
that's kind of cool though. So you got to compete at the internationals then in Long Beach, I'm assuming, a few times?
Oh yeah, several times. Fought teams there. I never placed at the internationals. I competed there from probably 7 or 8 times. And it's interesting because that back in the day, that was the tournament. I remember one particular tournament where, and I would in fighting, I think I won one time. I'm not exaggerating. I would fight light heavyweight, and there was one time there probably was 150 guys in my division, because I know they had 4 or 5 full rings. And I think I won my first 3 or 4 matches and still didn't even make it close to the finals. And this is interesting because back in the day, it used to be at the Long Beach Arena, and it was hardwood floors. Excuse me, not hardwood floors, cement floors. Yeah. Sweeps and takedowns were okay. Groin kicks okay. 3 seconds on the ground, and no headgear. And actually, I used to not wear on the West Coast. The hand pads were not required until the early 80s. Mm-hmm. So first 3 or 4 years as a black belt, it was still bare knuckle if you wanted. I usually wore foot pads and foot gear and shin pads, but no hand pads. Anyway, so it was a little different era. But those were, I think athletes are better now, but they were tough dudes back then.
Yeah. Now, did you primarily compete in fighting? Did you ever get involved in forms or weapons?
I did both. I did both. I was a good solid, I was rated. I got as high as rated number 4 in Karate Illustrated back in the day.
Nice.
So I competed regionally. I was a pretty good regional competitor for and I fought guys like Steve Nasty Anderson and Alvin. I fought Alvin Prouder, if you ever heard that name, and Chip Wright and the guys, Steve Curran, Steve Mad Dog Curran, all the guys from that kind of generation, I fought most of them.
Wow.
Right after the blood, not quite right after the Bill Wallace, Joe Louis, Chuck Norris, the next generation was kind of my generation.
Okay. Yeah, I actually met Steve Nasty Anderson. He was I didn't get to see him fight. He retired with them, but I met him at the Diamond Nationals in 1990 or 91. He was there, and I got to meet him, and somewhere I got a picture of him. So
yeah, I fought him in a team competition. It was Northern California versus Southern California, and I was on the Northern California team, and of course he was 10 times the fighter I ever was. But I actually was I was ahead of him for a while. Then I ended up, it was it's funny how you remember things. I was ahead 2-0, 3-1, 5-3. It was, and then this was a team fight, so it was unlimited points. And I believe it was a 3-minute round, which is unclear. And then he had me figured out the last minute and just kicked the tar out of me. I don't even know what the number. However many points you can score in the last minute, that's how many he scored on me. And
wow.
Anyway, but it was a great experience.
That is so cool. You're a few years older than me, but I was born in 74, so I never got to see any of that. I mean, I've seen videos of some of that stuff back in the 60s, 70s, but never got to experience any of that live, which was just what an experience hearing about those tournaments and how big the internationals were back then. I mean, I've been to some decent sized tournaments, but wow.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I was just at the IBJJF Worlds in August, Memorial Day weekend this year, Labor Day weekend, excuse me, when I competed in the, check this out, in the over 60, I was in the middleweight over 60 black belt division. And there were 12 guys in my division. There was 10,000 competitors at this tournament, 10,000. Wow. It's insane what's going on in that jiu-jitsu world now. It's like with black belts over 60, there was about 50 competitors if you add up all the different age groups.
That's
so it's
crazy.
kind of anyway, fun facts. So
that's very fun.
Reminded me of the internationals back in the day.
So now thinking back to that, Bruce, your first instructor, what are some things that stood out about him and maybe his specific teaching style and some things you really remember?
Yeah, so this was in the 70s. It was a different era, and especially in American Kempo schools. And by the way, I was never part of Mr. Parker's IBJ, his Kempo Federation, because
Hmm.
politically, although I went to probably a dozen seminars with him,
Yeah.
and I knew a lot of the guys who were never part of the organization. But it was definitely like the blood and guts era. There wasn't really, like, I look at how I run our schools now, and
Hmm.
it was very different. Meaning, it was most of the students there were 18 to 25-year-old tough guys, and the idea was to whatever you learned in class, you tried at the bar that night. And that was just kind of the mentality. Now, I was too little for that. I was like the mascot because there's very few kids. So
Yeah.
when I started, I was 13, and there wasn't a lot of kids there. So I didn't actually, of course, I wasn't trying it out at the bars, but that was kind of the mentality. It was just to put it in perspective, there was literally, and of course, everything was different then, but there was an actual ashtray in the lobby, and guys would be sitting out there in between classes smoking cigarettes. And
Wow.
as soon as the close sign went on, the doors got locked and there was a party. This happened almost every night. The beer would come out, the hard liquor would come out. And I look back, and my instructor, I still have a relationship with. As a matter of fact, I talked to him earlier this morning. And I think, man, well, at the time, he was only 10 years older than me. That made him 23, and
Okay.
it was a different age. And then what happened is that I eventually, about 6 months out of high school, in November of 1978, I opened up my first school. And so that was 45 years ago, like, in November of this year. And I started, working from there, and then I struggled for probably for years and years. And finally, this movie came out. I'm trying to think of it in the 80s. What was it called? Oh yeah, Karate Kid. And all of a sudden it just blew up. Things just changed dramatically. And they were kids, and there was all of a sudden this was a viable business. And so I went to a Grandmaster Junior seminar in January or February of 1987.
Hmm.
And that's the first time I was really exposed to. By the way, I've been around a bunch of really good Kempo people, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
the protocol was so different with it. But when I met Grandmaster Junior, he was this really fit, 50 plus dude. Everybody, the protocol was super tight. The respect factor was really clear. He had kind of a philosophy and a student creed, and it was just like, it was so different than what I'd been exposed to. But that had a real big influence on what and how I teach. It's like, this is that kind of spiritual element, so to speak, that I'd never been exposed to, that is part of this. And it's not, like I said, my instructor and the guys that I trained with were good guys. It was just not, that wasn't something, there was any emphasis on that.
Yeah.
This was just really about becoming as good as you can and trying to, being able to beat people up if you needed to.
You mentioned opening your school. So I'm curious, at what age and what belt level did you first get involved in the teaching side of martial arts, and what kind of drew you to that? Because obviously that's a big part of your life now.
Yeah. Well, interesting is that, I don't know, have you ever heard of the Tracy's Karate Studios
Oh, yes.
before?
Yep.
Well, so that the school that Bruce Jutnick's school was actually formerly a Tracy's. I think it went over from Tracy's just literally 6-8 months before I started there, right?
Okay.
And so it was a private lesson system. Tracy's model was basically, what happened is you paid for a private lesson, so whatever it was going to be, $30 or $40 a month, whatever the package was going to be, and you got one private a week, one half-hour private a week, and then you made 2 classes. That was the business model that Tracy used. And so what that means, if you have 100 students, do the math on how many private lessons need to be taught every week,
Wow.
right? And so what happened is very early on, you became an instructor. So I started teaching when I was probably a 14-year-old purple belt,
Wow.
right? Because that's just what everybody did. That was the only way you got the job done. And so, and it was interesting because I was just a kid, and there was very few kids in the program. So I was teaching adults, and I kind of realized early on that I'm not going to intimidate them into it. I mean, I was such a little kid. My voice didn't change until I was about 17. When I got my driver's license, I was 5'3" and weighed 115 pounds. So I'm not going to, come on back here, let me show you how to kick some tail. It just wasn't going to work, right?
Yeah.
So it was just kind of being enthusiastic about what we were learning. So I started teaching early on, and I was mostly kind of running my instructor school by the time I was about 16 or 17.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of fell into the opportunity about 6 months out of high school. There was another gentleman who was under Bruce Jutnick, who had opened up a school, 8 miles away from the headquarters school, and he was wanting to get out. And I kind of, for very cheap, was able to step in and take over. And originally it was just going to be something, I talked my parents into loaning me some money for it, and it was just going to get me through college. And of course, it turned out to be more than that.
Just a little, yeah. So think back then to 14-year-old you first start teaching to now. What do you think has changed the most about your teaching style over all those years?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, I think it's interesting. When you're a kid, you're invincible, right? You don't understand. So, training was always hard. I didn't really I look at some of the tests, and of course, when I was 14 and 15 and 16, I was just following directions. I wasn't, what I'm saying? I'm doing
Hmm.
private lesson and some classes, but I think the difference now, I think, is that wisdom comes from experience remembered. And, one of the things, for example, my classes are way, 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 way safer than they used to be, as they are in all our locations, right? Because I learned the hard way through all the dumb stuff that I did when people got hurt in class, what not to do. I'd also like to think that our students are better now because our training methodologies are way more effective. And also, I remember for years I had this small school and we competed all the time. And when I would see bigger schools and people that were maybe not really a good athletic at a tournament, I would say, my students are better than their students. And well, the thing was, is all the people that really needed martial arts, I'd scared away. So what I had is a bunch of people that didn't really need it in the first place. They're already tough, right?
Hmm.
And so we've also adjusted our training to make sure that, it's something that the average person can do. So, I mean, I could go on, but we would stretch cold. We didn't understand the science behind warming the body up, and we had way too much curriculum. So when I tested for my black belt, in American Kempo, it's very heavy self-defense based. By the way, I love all the moves that I learned, and I still know everything. That stuff that I learned as a kid is genetically embedded into it's just imprinted in me, right?
Nice.
But when I tested for my black belt, I probably knew, I'm not exaggerating, probably 35 or 40 different defenses against a right hand shoulder grab, right? So what that means is that if someone grabbed my shoulder, I had no idea what to do because I had too many things floating around in my head, right? And so I've learned over the time that less is better. So we've constantly over the years pared back on our curriculum, and not to make it easier on our students, but to make them be able to respond quicker, and I still teach a lot of stuff, but a lot of it's just as option. It's just kind of, I call it candy, martial arts
Hmm.
candy, just something fun. We all like go to a seminar and learn some cool moves, but the bottom line is basics done well are really where we focus.
Nice. You mentioned your black belt test. Talk a little bit about that, some of the things you remember, and how just talked a little bit about it already, but how does it compare to your black belt test today that you give your
So,
students?
so my black belt test, what I would have been right on Memorial Day of 1977, right around my 18th birthday. And I didn't even know I was testing. Things were done differently for then, right? And
Hmm.
I kind of had a feeling I was testing. And my instructor, Bruce Judnick, met me down. He said, "Come on down, meet me." So it was Monday, Memorial Day, 1977. And there's a couple other guys there. And he asked me to do a few forms. And then him and the two other guys just beat the crap out of me for about an hour and a half. And that was it. And then that Wednesday, I came back to class and I was in class. And at the end of class, he goes, "Oh, everybody stop for a minute." And he pulled out a black belt and said some nice things and gave me my black belt. So,
Wow.
and then, it was also interesting is that there really wasn't any curriculum. At least I can't speak for everyone everywhere.
Hmm.
Right. But in general, my cursory, view based on talking to guys from my generation from various styles, they all kind of agree there was really not a lot of curriculum after black belt. There was get your black belt and that's it. And then you just train. And then as far as degrees after, there wasn't really, a lot of here's what you got to do for first to second and second to third and third to fourth. And so it's all kind of stuff we kind of had to figure out, so to speak.
Wow. And then how is that different compared to today for your students?
Well, today our test is completely different. So first and foremost, it's still extremely hard,
Hmm.
but it's not the same kind of hard, especially meaning, I have between our East Coast schools and our West Coast schools, we have about 4,200 students, right?
Wow.
And so that's about 16 locations, and all of them we run pretty high active counts. And I share that with you is that safety is super important because a lot of times you have and so like we don't, although we spar, we grapple, we do padded weapon. It's very it's not the Wild West, for a couple of reasons. First off, it's the wrong thing to do. Secondly, the liability factor in that,
Yeah.
especially in California, forget it. You've got a 13-year-old that, gets hurt on a black belt test, you're going to see that in court. It's
Wow.
just like we have to be safer now.
Yeah.
Right. So our test is more like, let's say you've been training it's 4 or 5 years to get your black belt. And what happens is it's really it's a 4-month process. You go into what's called black belt prep class cycle. And what happens is you're given all these assignments and several tests over the course of 4 months. We meet on a weekly basis, and we're drilling on and repping on this, and then we'll have a day where we are testing on one aspect, and a day we're testing on the other. And along the way, what we're doing is we're weaning people. So let's just say I know that you're not going to be ready, that the final test and then the promotion is going to be, let's just say it's going to be, February 12th.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I already know, here it is. It's the first part of January, and it's clear you're not going to be ready. So I'm going to wean you out. In other words, I'm going to tell you right now, hey, Brian, guess what, man? You're not going to be ready for this. You're going to have to wait till the May cycle. And here's why. Boom. And so I'm going to take you out. So by the time we actually get to the final 2 weeks, and it'll be like a Saturday where they do their final pretest. And that's where any last minute people, that's a super technically, that's where we're hitting all their curriculum, make sure their stances are correct and they know all their skills, etc. And their spirit is high. And then if they pass that, they come back the following week for their final test. And that's actually not very long. It's only a couple hours.
Okay.
But rarely does anybody not pass at that point. If they weren't ready, then they never make it to that level. Because the last thing I want to do is I don't want to have their wife or their parents show up, or grandma comes for them to fail. You know what I'm saying? So that's already happened ahead of time.
Okay.
So I think, so that's how, so they could fail up till the week prior, and they could fail that day, but it rarely happens.
So then average for that 4-month cycle, how many start it, and then how many get to that final test? Usually roughly how many do you cut?
This last one on the West Coast, we test people from junior advanced brown to junior black belt, which is not the same as a Shodan, not the same as the first degree.
Right.
And you have to be a minimum of, you started when you were 4, now you're 11 or 12 years old to test for junior black belt. And if you include those and people going from first degree and then people beyond, I think we had about 110 candidates that started, and we had about 65 that completed.
Wow. So about 50% roughly, a little more.
Yeah. But by the way, with a lot of those people, we encourage them to double cycle. Like you come in and say, hey, Brian, the next test is in April, but I got to be honest with you. I don't know if you're going to be ready. Go ahead and go through the cycle. I'm thinking September is going to be your final test date.
Okay.
So we try to set them up for success. Our experience has been that I don't mind disappointing people, but I don't want to anger them. And what I mean by that is that if you don't let someone know, you secretly, because you've seen guys that you don't really think are going to test, but you let them go past, but you let them do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then you fail them, but you never maybe gave them a warning or something. That may not happen in smaller schools, but often it might happen when there's a lot of students. So we make it a point of pre-framing ahead of time. Hey, this is a process. You're not, you may not pass this time. And so now let's just say it's 3 weeks before the black belt test, and I have to talk with you. And let's say you're 15 years old, and I'm talking to your parents, letting you know you're not ready. You're going to be disappointed, but you're not going to be angry because I've been letting you know the process all along. Versus the final day, grandma shows up and everybody's there, and then that day when people are being promoted, I say, sorry, you didn't pass. It just doesn't. There's a better way to do it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, that's actually you're the first one I've heard that does it that way. That's actually kind of cool. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so it allows us actually to be harder on people if the truth is known, because we set clear expectations and we're giving them feedback along the way. And as soon as we know they're not going to be ready, we that's it. It's kind of like, you're in boot camp, you get booted out. You know what I mean? If you make it to the final day of boot camp, you're going to pass. It's that would be kind of how we do our black belt prep cycle.
And then at what point then in your martial arts journey did you start branching out into other styles? Because I mentioned you have black belts in multiple styles.
Honestly, out of the gate. So like I said, my instructor, I started in karate in 73. I'd already been wrestling. My instructor, when we started the school, he had a Kodokan jiu-jitsu guy coming twice a week. A guy named Bob McCain ended up being a very well-known guy. So I was doing old school jiu-jitsu, right away. Mm-hmm. I started that. And then in the mid-70s, in 75, Bruce Dutton was training with Angel Caballas and set out at Eskrima. So I started Eskrima about, in 75 or 76. And then as soon as I could get on the mats for jiu-jitsu, I started. So that was in the early 90s, right after the first UFC, the first place I could find. And along the way, I've been training in Iaido and Kabuto and a guy named Shion Makai Nishiuchi. And I've got like a black belt equivalent in there, Burton Richardson and Jeet Kune Do. And so I've just always been a guy that likes to train in different styles. It's kind of jack of all trades, master of none would definitely be, probably what you would, where I'd fit into.
Nice.
And by the way, I have nothing. I think I have nothing but respect for someone that did one style their whole life and just poured their spirit into it, you know. But that's just not my journey, It's kind of like I like various things. And the downside of that is that like it would be kind of like a person that could play a bunch of musical instruments,
Hmm.
right? If you wanted to learn how to do lead guitar, you're going to go to someone that just specializes in lead guitar. You're not going to go learn from someone that can play a bunch of different instruments, but not quite as well. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah,
So
perfect
kind of
sense.
like for me, but I'm okay with that. So like I said, I'm pretty good at a lot of different styles, but I'm not great at anything. But I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kabuto. What's your favorite weapon?
Definitely, hands down, my favorite Kabuto weapon would be a bow.
Okay.
Yeah,
That seems to
yeah,
be the going. Most of my guests, I think probably about 80% of my
yeah.
guests pick bow staff for their favorite. Because to me, it does seem the most practical in a modern world.
Yeah, and they're all my absolute favorite weapon would be a single stick from like Filipino weaponry. That's
Oh,
my base choice. But as far as
okay.
Kabuto goes, a bow staff because of its length
Yeah.
and like I've been doing for nunchaku since I was a little kid, and I'm pretty proficient, at most. And they're all very fun. Actually a tonfa is a great weapon too.
That's my
But
favorite. I love
but
tonfa.
the reality is, and none of it's how do I say this? That anymore, you don't really practice. If you really want to be like in this day and age, it's going to be a gun and knife is what you're going to be good at, right?
Yeah.
I practice that stuff really more for history than anything else.
Okay. So
Yeah.
thinking back to when you first opened your school, if you could go back and talk to yourself back then and give yourself one piece of advice you wish you would have had back then, what would it be?
Oh man, hang in there and learn as much as you can.
Nice. You've written a few books. Kind of what led to that? Where did that interest come from? And talk about some of your books you've written.
So in the early '90s, so first off, in the '80s, after I'd mentioned that I went to a junior seminar, and
Hmm.
shortly after, my business it was blowing up. There were so many kids starting in the late '80s. In martial arts, it was just kind of that's really the golden age kind of kids martial arts getting started, and I was kind of at the right place at the right time with the right product. And I couldn't even process how many members that we had. Okay. And so I asked my older brother who had some experience in business to become my partner. That was in October of 1987. And
Okay.
by the early '90s, I'm not making this up, at our headquarters school, which my brother and I bought back in '93, we had over 900 members in the one location.
Wow.
And so what was going on during the week, we would be teaching. And then on weekends, I would be going to, seminars, Stephen Covey, Brian Tracy, Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, and then martial arts seminars and trying to integrate that into my curriculum. And then I did an event in '93. There was an organization called Educational Funding Company. I don't know if you've heard of them or not, but they were the first kind of consulting company. The guy that started it was a guy named Nick Kokinos, who was actually Junior's business partner in the
Oh.
'60s and '70s. And most of the people in the martial arts world that do consultants stem from this organization. And so we hosted an event at our school, and we had about 300 martial arts school owners from around the country show up, and I demonstrated how we taught classes. And the reason why I share that with is because I had my brother as my partner. I didn't have to wear both hats of the business and the teaching. I just focused on teaching and staff development. And so we come up with some unique kind of ways we lined up class and how we talked to kids. And I demonstrated that. And everybody kept on saying, oh, man, you got to write this down. So in 1993, I put together a video series called How to Teach Martial Arts to Kids. And it just blew up. It was like a VHS tape and a small little manual. And we sold, well over 1,000, right?
Hmm.
And then we started doing a bunch of other stuff. Well, in the process, that's why I started documenting teaching strategies. And then eventually that led into my first book, was called The Martial Arts Instructor's Toolbox. And then I wrote another book called The Dad's Toolbox for Better Parenting, which was taking the stuff that I learned from teaching martial arts and what I'd observed from good parents within my program. And so it's it's very martial arts based. And
Hmm.
then another one that is what's called Brief Moments of Clarity, which would be kind of my version of Chicken Soup for the Soul, kind of like little stories that I experienced.
Okay.
And so anyway, I never like consciously sat down and said, all right, it was stuff that I already had massive notes on,
Hmm.
that I was able to kind of formulate into a book.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking on Amazon. It looks like most of them are still available on Amazon.
Yes, they're all available on Amazon. Yes.
So any plans for another book in the future?
I actually do. Yes, I have. I'm about halfway through. I'm not committing to anything. It's called Cultivating a Leadership Mindset: How Small Changes of Perspective Can Lead to Massive Progress. And it's kind of taken It's very martial based. It's kind of based on Bushido, right? Warrior
Mm-hmm.
code of the samurai, and how it applies to life and business, etc. And kind
Nice.
of utilizing the five spirits of Budo, Zanshin, Fudoshin, Mushin, Senshin, and Shoshin, and how those apply to how you can apply those to kind of living. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not, like I said, I don't have a. I'm the guy that if I commit to something, if I say I'm going to do it, then I got to do it. So I haven't fully committed to finishing it yet.
Okay. That's cool though. Also, just scrolling through your Amazon stuff, you also did a video on American Kempo.
I've got a bunch of videos. The one you see probably is a guy in Europe who put together a video. I think that's the one. Yeah, he still sells it. I've actually, just for whatever it's worth, between you, me, and a tree, it's like I'm not going to do any legal action. I've never seen a dime from it.
Oh, wow.
I have no idea how many we sold. It was some kind of, and I don't, it's all good. It's like, it's not going to affect me either way. It's been good exposure. Yeah. So.
Okay. So are the other videos you did, are those still available anywhere?
Yeah, but not, those are all, I run an organization, basically there for a subscription based. I have a program called the Instructor's Toolbox, where it's monthly videos, the weekly videos on how to teach kids, how to teach adults, messages of the week, etc. that I offer, but it's like a subscription based. I don't have any more. And also Century, I have a bunch of videos online through Century or through Century.
Very cool.
And they're targeted more towards, they're not as much general public stuff as they are more towards school owners, centered around drills and skills.
Okay. So talk about Kovar Systems and kind of what led to that starting, and what that's about.
Well, I mentioned that I was doing presentations for EFC. Eventually, we started formally coaching schools in the early 2000s, and that's kind of where I probably spend most of my time. And we coach them in best practices. And my philosophy, these are for professional martial arts schools, right? My philosophy is martial arts first, teaching second, business third. And what that means is that I think one of the key things to having a successful martial arts school is you got to have passion for training. You got to love what martial arts does. It can't just be widgets. It can't be just, let me see, should I open up a used tire store, or should I open up a martial arts school? It's got to be something that's your passion, right?
Right.
And that's the starting point. And then once you have that, then really that's half the job of being a good instructor is being passionate about your training, right? And but there's a lot of tips that go into being a good instructor. How can you, how do you line up the class effectively? We have all these things, these strategies that every really good instructor stumbles upon eventually after maybe a couple decades of teaching. But if you can teach people out of the gate these strategies, they become better very fast. So so it's martial arts first, teaching second, and then business third, and that's how you keep track of statistics, how you hire and train people, how you enroll people, how you advertise, all that stuff. So that's all part of the umbrella. So that's kind of what we do with Kovar Systems, is we take school owners. We have everywhere from a lot of the top school owners in the country that are either current clients or former clients with us, or it might be someone that's just starting from scratch that kind of wants to get it right out of the gate. And what happens, they'll become a part of our organization, and we'll do, coaching with them weekly. And then we have a resource library that has, anything you can imagine. Well, I'm sure there's things you could imagine that aren't there, but, really anything that has to do with how to run a martial arts school, we have it documented in videos, text on it, etc. So a school can go.
Is that a combination of in-person and virtual type things that they can do? Or?
Yes, exactly. So I run about 10 live events a year throughout different places in the country that our clients can attend, as well as then once they're a client, then we'll do, like tomorrow morning, I've got a Zoom call that I'll have a bunch of people on that, it's called Make Your School Over in 24, and how things that people can do to make sure that they're on track. And then, so we have individual coaching as well as group coaching online, and then live seminars.
Okay. And then the other one I want to talk about is your Satori Academy. Just talk a little bit about that, and kind of first of all, like where the name Satori, where you got that from, and kind of what that means.
So the name of our school is Kovar Satori Academy. Satori is a Japanese word that literally translated means a moment of enlightenment or a moment of deep understanding. It's that aha moment. You wake up in the morning with an answer to a challenge you figure out, or you're doing a crossword puzzle, and finally the word you're looking for, boom, pops into your head. Pop, that's like a Satori moment. For us, we modified the name a little bit. For me, what Satori means is in the moment at your best, and it refers to that present state of consciousness when you have mental clarity, physical energy, and emotional calm, right? It's would be considered, now it's flow state. We used to call it being in the zone. when just things are working for you. And the key to high performance is energy fueled from positive emotion. What that means is kind of you at your best. And I'm sure you can identify with it at a time, whether it be on the mat or, in a boardroom or giving a lecture where you were just flowing, man. Everything was just working right. So the whole intention is if you train with the right mindset, the right way, you're mindfully over time, you're able to be in that state on a more consistent basis. And then that bleeds over into your daily life, right? So if you could wake up, imagine if you could wake up from bell to bell, first thing in the morning until you go to bed at night, just kind of being at your best. How much more productive would you be? How much more enjoyable would it be to be with you, right? How much healthier you would be, and what decisions you make. So that's basically our definition of Satori. So being in the moment at your best.
Wow. Okay, cool. And then, so what if someone asks you, they've never been to your school before, and say, hey, what style do you teach? How do you answer that?
Well, it's a great question. So it becomes less and less of an issue now. So we would call it blended Kempo,
Okay.
right? And anymore, like I have an organization where there's orphans. Let's just say you got your 4-3 black belt and your instructor died. You have nowhere to go. What do you do, right? So we have an organization called the Satori Alliance, where we have people from all over the world that are part of it, and it's that we call Satori Ryu, and it's a multi-style. Basically, it's a mixed martial arts style.
Okay.
We require them to be proficient in one weapon. They need to be able to be effective at kicking, striking, clinching, and grappling. And then if you come to me and you're already a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we're not going to worry too much about filling in that gap because you clearly are already good at that range. But maybe you've never picked up a weapon before, so we're going to take a look at you. We're going to look at you and decide where you're weak, and we're going to give you an area to focus on. So the whole intention with Satori Ryu is, in this day and age, in 2024, there's no excuse not to be well-rounded. That doesn't mean you have to. You don't have to be great at everything. But honestly, and this is just my opinion, it does. Everybody has the right to do whatever they want. There's really no excuse not to have your students understand if someone's mounted on top of them, how they get them off them, right? I mean, I feel like if there's a realistic self-defense component to your curriculum, and who am I to say? If you teach Olympic Taekwondo, that's great, man. That's awesome. That's wonderful. Who am I to tell you should do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're teaching, or any style, but if under the subtitle is, yeah, man, we're trying to teach effective self-defense. I didn't want to call out Olympic Taekwondo because I know a bunch of amazing, very tough guys that do that. It could be Shotokan, it could be a Kempo, it doesn't matter. Even sport jiu-jitsu guys that just do sport grappling, they're missing out on a lot of self-defense components. But if that's something that's part of what you're trying to teach, then you really owe it to your students to teach them how to defend against a takedown, how to teach them if someone's mounted, so what we try to do is we try to make somebody have an understanding to where they might not be great at every range, but they're not ignorant to every range. So, someone's trying to take them down, they understand how to defend against that. Someone's got a knife in their hand, they understand, basics as to how to defend against that. And by the way, the best way to defend against a knife is to run like heck, right? But so that's what that's kind of what makes up. Although we do have some compulsory material that they have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's taking a look at someone coming into our organization and seeing where they're strong and whether we can try to round off the corners.
I love that. I'd love to, hopefully next time I get to California, come visit your school. I've never been to Northern California, so I'd love to come visit your school sometime. It'd be fun to check out.
You're more than welcome.
So I know you mentioned, when after the first UFC came out, that's when you got involved in BJJ. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on like MMA and the UFC, and is that something you're a fan of?
Yeah, I got a love-hate relationship with it.
Okay.
So, I just I had a bunch of guys over to the house a couple weeks ago for a fight like 3 weeks or a month ago, right? Mm-hmm. But I think so. First off, I remember my first art was wrestling. We used to not consider it a martial arts, but now it's kind of under the combat, And so I've always had an affinity towards grappling. I always enjoyed it. I used to do a thing in the 80s called Kempo wrestling, which we just wrestle, and I call it Kempo wrestling because we punch each other when we were grappling, right?
Nice.
And we didn't really know much, but then I started in the late 80s hearing about the Gracies and the Gracie Challenge, and nobody really knew what it was, but you'd hear about it. And there's a couple guys I really respected and said, oh, they worked out with these guys. And so I was I remember when the UFC was being advertised, I was watching the very first one, and That was in, I think, December of 93, just like literally 30 years ago, right?
Yep.
And the very first thing we did right after that, there was a gentleman named Craig Kukuk, who was a black belt, and I believe under Kenzo Gracie, who had one of the first American black belts who actually had video series. That was the first exposure, was the first part of 94. One of my students, one of my black belts, and I bought some Kukuk videos, and we're starting to learn how to do an armbar on that. And then there's a gentleman named Caesar Gracie, who opened up one of the first schools in Northern California, about an hour and a half from my place. He opened up in May of 94, and I started in June of 94. That was when my journey started.
That's cool. So are you, as a fan, are you more a fan of the old school style versus style, or the current?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, my ADHD kicked in.
That's cool.
The original question. So when it comes to UFC, that was, I apologize. What I know, of course, it's now UFC, the lifespan of most fighters is very short, right? So it's hard to keep track of everybody anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like I couldn't tell you all the latest fighters, but I have nothing but respect for how much better the athletes are now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. It's like hands down. Because remember, guys now that are fighting UFC, they were born after it started. Yeah. So kids are coming up doing mixed martial arts right out of the gate. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So they're so much better. And so from an athletic standpoint, nothing but respect. I think it's opened up the doors for a lot of a lot of reality-based stuff. Of course, self-defense is different than the ring. Of course, I understand that. But so with that said, we know a lot of stuff now that we actually know works and doesn't work. Right. I like when it comes to wrist joint manipulation, like I said, no disrespect towards like an Aikido stylist or an old Hapkido stylist, because that stuff is very effective when it's done in concert with other stuff. But my experience as a grappler is really to be able to make a wrist flex work on somebody is almost impossible. Yeah. Right. And so the challenge with a lot of those arts is they're not done. They're done against a willing opponent, someone that's letting them do the movement, right? And that's what I really appreciate about like jiu-jitsu specifically. Is I was training this morning, as a matter of fact. It's Sunday in California, and we're doing this taping, and got up this morning and met a couple of local black belts, and we grappled for an hour, and I tapped a couple times, and there was no I could have got you with that. Either if they get you, you tap. If not, you don't, right? Yeah. And so that's what's missing in a lot of the arts. And it doesn't mean they're not functional. It's just that you got to find a way to do it with full resistance. So I think that's what the UFC has shown us. The cons of it is that, in order to sell tickets, there's a lot of hype, and the respect and courtesy that is, such an important part of martial arts isn't always apparent. But then you see guys like, GSP and Steve Wonderboy Thompson, which are such gentlemen. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of them, right? That are such gentlemen. But the general public doesn't, they see all the hype, and the hype sells fights, right? So I get it. That part I'm not as big of a fan about.
Yeah, they see the general public sees the Conor McGregors and the Brock Lesnars, and they think that's what everyone's like, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. So that part I don't really, and I don't know how good it is for business. Meaning, if you're a mom and you oversee the UFC, do you want to enroll your 8-year-old? Because sometimes they can't differentiate that from what we do in our school. You know what I'm saying? So, and then the flip side is that you also have a certain amount of young tough guys that follow UFC that think every traditional martial arts is a bunch of junk, and that's just not the case. Like for example, my generation of karate guys. There are a lot of tough guys that I knew that were really tough guys that knew nothing about grappling. They were still badasses. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the modern young UFC guys, followers think that karate's junk and taekwondo's junk and Shotokan's junk and Kempo's junk. And that's just not true. The difference is you cannot be tough and do some of those arts. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean there's not tough guys doing it.
Yeah, exactly. I know the one argument I always had people who are like, oh, it won't work in a I'm like, you're comparing it to someone who also is a martial artist. In a normal situation, if you're using self-defense, the person you're using it against is not a trained martial artist. So it's going to work.
Yeah, well, and the thing that always gets me is that, like, I had this discussion. I have a friend of mine who's a casual acquaintance. I used to see him around a lot more, but this is 10, 15 years ago. We got to lunch, and as a Filipino, I don't know how much Filipino weaponry you've done, or a practitioner. If you're an FMA person, that's Filipino martial arts. It's very common that you carry a blade or 2 or 3 on you at all times. That's just kind of the protocol, right? Okay. And I used to, but I don't anymore. I just say, what am I doing, man? me, right? And it's like part of it, and also it was because I travel a lot, and I kept on forgetting that I have a knife in my pocket and losing it and going through security, right?
Yep.
So I probably lost 10 really good, expensive blades because I forgot
Dang.
and I didn't want to go back out to my car because I didn't have time, etc.
Yeah.
So anyways, the point is that I don't carry, rarely do I have a blade on me or anything. But so I'm having lunch with my buddy who's this FMA guy, and he's a highlight. He goes, "Hey, Kovar, what are you packing right now? What do you got on you?" I got nothing. I've got nothing. He goes, "What do you mean? You don't have a knife on you right now or anything?" I go, "No." He goes, "Well, what if someone, I go, "Well, why do you carry?" He goes, "Man, I want to be ready. I want to live a long time. And what if a guy jumps out and, like you're in a back alley and jumps out with a knife?" And I look at him and he's eating a double cheeseburger with extra bacon on it and a milkshake. And I'm looking at him and I'm going, "Dude, the odds of us dying, you're going to die from cancer or heart disease." Do you understand what I'm getting? Like if you're really about self-defense, then we got to go beyond just what technique works for your blade. It's like, what are you putting in your body? How much sleep are you getting? That's all part of it. So the self-defense discussion, once we go down that line, I feel like if you really want to defend yourself to live a long, healthy life, a big chunk of that is your lifestyle. I mean, that's probably more important than whether you know how to deal with a right punch or something, And not that dealing with a right punch isn't important, but I don't know if that made any sense.
Oh, it's a great point. Yeah. All right. So in your 50 years of martial arts, is there one philosophy you've learned that is at the top of your list?
I think if I would say, if you want to keep training, I'd mentioned it earlier, but wisdom comes from experience remembered. I think in training, it's consistency is king. So, like I literally, my fitness regimen, there's almost never a day. I'll miss a day a month that I don't exercise. Like
Wow.
I literally every day, right? 7 days a week. Just like you eat 7 days a week, you sleep 7 days a week. But I don't train hard.
Yeah.
And a good workout is better than a great workout because a great workout gets you injured eventually. And so, but I'm consistent as possible. And that's the same with the martial arts. Like I'm not kicking like I did at one time. I'm almost 65. I'm banged up, but I'm still out there. So I guess it's don't compare yourself with other people. Don't compare yourself with a younger version of yourself. Just enjoy the process of training.
Nice. I like that. All right. So I got a few fun questions to wrap up the interview. Now, this one, it doesn't have to be 4. I've had as few as 2 and as many as 8, so it's up to you. But who are like 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Bruce Lee, of course.
Nice.
Ernie Reyes.
Nice.
Dan Inosanto.
Cool.
Eric Paulson. If you ever met him or heard of him, he's amazing.
I'm hopefully going to be interviewing him. I interviewed a friend of his, and he's going to try to put me in touch with him. So
I know him. He's a really good dude. He's a genius.
Nice.
And let me think. I would say, just because I love what he represents to the MMA world, I would put GSP in there as well.
Very cool.
And Junri. Oh, Junri. Absolutely. Grandmaster Junri.
Nice. I had the honor. I got to interview Junri's son a couple months ago. Chunri.
Chunri. Know him well. Yes, sir.
Okay. Cool. So do you know Rick Fay?
Yes, I do. I don't know him well, but
okay.
I've met him once or twice. He wouldn't remember me.
Yeah, he's the one who told me about Eric Paulson. So hopefully gonna get in touch with Eric.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite? Obviously, can't pick one of yours. Do you have a favorite martial arts book?
Yeah, definitely Hagakure.
Oh, okay.
Hagakure was written by in the 17th century by a samurai named Tsunetomi, and it's a book that was documenting the samurai's lifestyle.
Wow.
Like Book of Five Rings really is a great book on philosophy by Musashi, but it's really not about the samurai lifestyle. So Hagakure, it talks about basically what a samurai strives to be like. By the way, if you read it, it's very politically incorrect. It was written when the caste system was alive and well.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So you have to kind of filter through it. But it has a bunch of gems. For like one example is that a samurai, I'm paraphrasing, a samurai never runs in the rain because he knows he's going to get wet anyway. He just walks proudly. He doesn't let it bother him.
Nice.
And by the way, like 10 years ago, Mythbusters did a thing to see if you get wetter if you run or walk in the rain. You actually get wetter if you run.
I thought
that was interesting.
Yeah, I remember that episode. Love that show.
Yeah, but I think it was some part of that was based on that. So it's just got a bunch of gems about how to live your lifestyle, and so that would probably and the other one would be the Dao Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee.
Nice. I love martial arts books, and I'll definitely add that to my list. Cool. All right. How about now this one you may not have an answer for. It's about 50-50 with my guest. Do you have a favorite martial arts video game?
No, man, I'm not I mean, the last video game I played was Pong. I don't really. Yeah, I would not.
It's actually kind of funny how many people have mentioned Pong when I bring up that question. So
That's because you're probably interviewing a bunch of old guys.
there we go. I had one of the original Pong systems I had picked up. I wish I wouldn't have sold it. I sold it at a garage sale, and I kicked myself for selling that thing. But it was fun to pull it every now and then and hook up to the TV and play. So.
Sure, of course. Very cool.
How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Well, it would have been Kung Fu back in the day. It's ironic because I remember going and watching a while back an old episode, and I didn't realize how bad the martial arts was when you first saw it. It is so bad, but back in the day, it was it. So no, I favorite martial arts TV show that was I loved the Green Hornet,
yes.
but as well. I can't even think. And the fun one was Ernie Reyes Jr. Sidekicks.
I love Sidekicks.
Remember that or not?
I
that was a great show.
Loved it.
That was a fun show, and I know him personally since he's a little kid. His father, Grandmaster Ernie Reyes Sr. is a good friend of mine, and I've known him for 45 years. He's one of my mentors and friends, and so I personally connected to that for that reason. So I'm sure after later on in the day, a bunch more will pop into my head. But there you go.
I'm hoping Disney Plus will actually put Sidekicks on there because it's owned by Disney.
Wow.
Other than some bad YouTube videos, you can't really find it anywhere, and I would love to rewatch that whole series. I loved it so much as a kid.
Yeah, it would be fun. Yep, totally.
So as a fan of Kung Fu, have you ever watched the new show Warrior?
No, what's it on? I'm going to write it down.
So I think right now it might be on HBO Max, but it's actually moving to Netflix in the next month or two. So its executive producer is Shannon Lee. And it was actually it was created from Bruce Lee's original notes for Kung Fu when it was supposed to be his show.
Warrior,
yes.
TV show. It's funny. Shannon Lee's actually been to my school before. One of my students won the Bruce Lee Award, and she came out. I actually have a picture of her and I standing next to this giant portrait I have of Bruce Lee that's about 10 feet tall that someone gave me. So, but that's amazing. So it's called Warrior.
Yeah, it's called Warrior. Yeah, like I said, if you have Netflix, it should be hitting Netflix. I think it's either in February or March it's hitting Netflix. It's 3 seasons, and if it goes well, I'm sure Netflix will probably do a 4th season, but I haven't watched the 3rd season yet, but the first 2 are really good. So if you are a fan of Kung Fu, I think you'd love it.
Outstanding. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
Oh, of course, Enter the Dragon.
Nice. That seems to be number one. I get other answers, but that's picked the most.
It's my first, second, and third favorite martial arts movie.
Nice. So, did you get to go to it this past summer for the 50th anniversary when they re-released it in theaters?
I didn't. I should have. I was aware of it, but I saw that movie I'm not making this up. I saw that 37 times in a theater when I was a kid.
God.
I used to go. Wow. My buddy and I would go to this, this where they would show Enter the Dragon, Return of the Dragon, Enter the Dragon, because that's when you do double feature. And we'd get dropped off at 10:30 in the morning, and we'd stay until 9 o'clock that night. We snuck in a tape recorder, so we could. So I at one point knew every line in that movie. I still know every Bruce Lee line, but
that's cool.
So it's one of those ones where I watch it every couple of years, and I was aware of the date. I just didn't. I can't remember why I didn't make it, but I did not make it.
That was actually the only time I've seen it on the big screen. Was this past August. Otherwise, I've seen it on video probably 50 times, but that was the only time I saw it in the theater, and it was such a cool experience.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right. Final question. This one doesn't necessarily have to be a martial arts movie, just overall any movie, a favorite movie fight scene.
Last of the Mohicans, the cliff closing battle.
Nice.
Where Magua and Nathaniel and Chinachicook are going after the girl. I don't know if you remember one on the cliffs. Yeah, that would be my favorite all time fight scene.
That's the first time that one's ever been. That's one reason I love this question. It's because I rarely there's a couple like people mention the Bruce Lee Chuck Norris fight scene. People mention Rocky and Ivan Drago, but I mean I've had people pick Napoleon Dynamite, The Princess Bride, Marvel movies. I mean, I get such wide answers. That's why I love that. It's so cool. There's another fight scene in the worst time to remember it during the beginning of the movie. It's also probably my second favorite. Yeah. Nice. Very cool. Well, before I let you go, is there anything maybe that I didn't get to ask you or that you would just want to be sure we get out there for people to know about? And when the episode comes out, I will put links to your school and your websites and everything.
Great.
And
I have a podcast called The Satori Lifestyle. You can find on any local. Yes, I do. So you can find it on anywhere you get podcasts, and it's primarily the newer versions are really targeted more towards martial arts professionals. However, it's a health, fitness, lifestyle, martial arts is really where I focus.
Okay. How often do you do episodes on that?
Every 2 weeks. I drop a new episode every 2 weeks.
Okay. And how long's that been going for?
3 or 4 years.
Oh,
but I probably had, I don't know. I know you've got a lot of episodes. I think we're at like 75 episodes, which clearly means I missed some time. I think I went a couple months here and there where I didn't get an episode out. Yes.
What made you decide to go down the podcast road?
You know what? It was one of those things that my team thought it would be a good idea to do, and I was trying to bridge the gap, still in between the benefits of martial arts to non-martial artists, and that was kind of the intention behind that, is to take some of the lessons that you and I have maybe learned from a martial arts experience and make those available to people that have never trained in martial arts. So maybe one of two things: so they have a takeaway they can put to work that day in their life, or that they might show some interest and want to go to a local dojo and enroll somewhere.
Okay. And is it usually just you? Do you have guests?
Yes, I have guests, primarily guests now. My first probably 50 episodes were just completely just me rambling, about a topic. But since then, the last 25 have been with guests.
Okay. I will definitely put a link for that out there too. That's cool. I love promoting other podcasts and martial arts podcasts. And like I said, I didn't know you did one. So that's one thing that did not show up.
I don't do as good a job in promoting it as I could, clearly.
Well, like I said, hopefully I can help change that. We'll get some links out there and hopefully get you some new listeners. And I love supporting other martial arts podcasts and other podcasts in general. It's a cool medium. I mean, myself, I have a radio background, so to me it was a little more natural, but I love people that are willing to try it. And that's the fact that you're at 75 episodes. It's, most people, at least beginner wise, don't make it past 7 episodes. So you're doing something right. That's good.
Well, I believe that. I got a good team around me. Yeah. So I believe that it is challenging. And if it was up to me solely, it probably wouldn't, in other words, because there's a few steps on there that are just a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So I got a good team that helps with that.
Cool. Well, Dave, I got to say, this has been a blast, man. I knew, like I said, I knew a lot about you just from reading stuff, but it's been fun chatting and kind of hearing your story. And I said, I do hope to meet you in person someday, but I can't wait till the episode comes out. I think people are really going to enjoy it.
All right, Brian. Well, I appreciate being on your show and best to you. And I'll do what I can to help you promote it in your podcast in general.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.